Okay, we're back. So let's talk about that Flexbox model again one more time. So here's how I got it I got the Flexbox model working, and let's take a look at that, what I did on the back end. So a couple changes. On the UL, okay, forget the nav for a second, but on the UL, I added in Flex, Display Flex, Flex Wrap, and Justify Content Flex End, which justifies my list items, okay? That's all I had to do. The rest stays the same, okay? So all this work, and all of a sudden, I've got my navigation bar running the way I want, with much less code than I had before, okay? So I'm showing what my code will look like, right? This is what it is right here. Notice also that when I do my responsive heading, it actually kind of collapses this way, right? This isn't really what I want, right? So now we're going to talk quickly about responsive web design, right? So again, whenever we do responsive web design, this will be my style that I have right here. When on full width, this is the style that I want for full width, like a page that's quite large. In responsive web design, sorry about that. In responsive web design, we have something called breakpoints, right? Like we talked about briefly last week. So let's take a look at that. So if I was to say, typical breakpoints, for responsive web design, right? And if you look that up, right, and it says media queries for common devices breakpoints. I'm just picking a random site here. But a lot of these sites are pretty good. So what they do is they can either talk in pixels and see how the media query has the syntax like this. And this is in your CSS. At media, and then it says only screen and, but you can just say screen and minimum device width or width, minimum width of whatever the pixel size is going to be, right? Notice how they say if the minimum width is 320 pixels and the maximum width is 480 pixels, that's for smartphones for portrait and landscape. So I could copy this piece right here. And again, I just search for typical, breakpoints. So that means that when depending on the size, that's your breakpoint, right? Well, how do I know what my size of my screen is here? Well, if I right-click anywhere and go inspect, right? And if I was to bring this down, notice how in the top right corner I have the size of my screen appearing on the top right corner because I've got my developer properties on, right? Let's reduce some of this. Notice also that on the bottom left-hand corner of my Chrome, I have this little phone that comes up, right? If I click the phone, it actually shows me how I can mimic what it would look like on different devices. So right now I've had it targeted to Apple iPad with my screen size as 768 by 1024, right? Let's take a look at other things. Let's say I want to go Apple iPhone 4. What would it look like on a iPhone 4? It would look like this, right? So I definitely don't want my iPhone 4, my typical 320 by 480 phone, to look like this, right? I want to create a media query so that when it's in here, right, I hide my navigation. I don't want to see my navigation in here. In fact, I want to show a button, right? I want to show a button and I want to hide my navigation. That's what I want to do, right? Okay, and I can do this all with CSS, right? So if I go back, I can also look at other phones, like an iPhone 6. What will an iPhone 6 see? This. Same, pretty much, just more detail. How about other things, like a Nexus 10? What will that look like? It looks like this, right? So a Nexus 10 actually can see the some of the navigation up here, right? It's pretty good. Again, I can look for different devices with this way by just pressing this little button on the bottom left-hand corner. So this is some kind of almost like simulation of what it's going to look like. By the way, this is never as good as using a real device. Whenever you do responsive web design, you always want to use a real device to test with because this is simply a simulation. It won't really do what you want it to do. You want to test with your actual phone you want to use, as an example. Now remember, it's a mobile world out there. So the best way to do things is start with mobile first, right? So what will my mobile first design look like, right? And then when do I want to kind of use a style where I can see my entire screen, right? Well, we can customize it like we did last time. So I know how big how much room my nav needs, right? And I want to get to the point where I use a specific breakpoint so that anything beyond that point, I can see my full navigation. Anything less than that point, I want to use some other kind of navigation scheme. And only for my navigation bar, right? So how do I do that? First, let's take this off. And notice how my navigation looks like it's full. I can see all my links at approximately 921 pixels wide. I just keep going down. And if I keep on kind of reducing the pixel size, there's going to come a point using the Flexbox model, which is probably right there, around 640 pixels, that looks like, that I can't see my navigation anymore. If I click this, it goes, after 640 pixels, I kind of collapse. I don't want that to happen. When I go less than 640 pixels, I want a different navigation scheme, right? So I want it to respond. This is what the responsive web design comes from. I want it to respond to my different viewport size and give me a different look and feel. All right, so let's maximize this for a second and do some media queries. So all this stuff we did here with my masthead and everything else, following my navigations. This is actually my navigation piece right here. Anything after this, right? This is when I want to impose my media query, right under here. After anything under my after my nav UL. Okay? So let's do that. So I want to say, here's how we started off. We say at media, right? And again, screen and in brackets, min width, let's say 640 pixels. We're going to convert that in a second, right? And I want anything that's at media screen and min width 640 pixels to produce any styles that are in between this area. So we'll minimize this for a second so you get rid of this so you can see the whole thing. So min width, so media screen, mid width 640 pixels, I want to have a different style, right? And this is the style that I want. I want all this stuff I just did to go in here, right? That means that by default, I have no style because I'm only putting that style. That style's only going to kick in. All this stuff that we just did is only going to kick in inside of my that specific screen size, which is 640 pixels or greater. Right, that's what I want to do. So let's make sure I'm just going to reformat this to make it look a little nicer. Right, there we go. And let's see the effect of this. So anything greater than 640 pixels is what this is saying. If I go back to here and if I refresh, still good, right? So desktop size, no effect. But when I scrunch into a smaller screen, so if I go beyond 640 pixels, now it's got back to this, right? This is what I want. I want it to, once I come to this point, I want it to scrunch into something else. Now we can keep some of the styles, but what I want to do is I want to hide my navigation altogether. I don't want to even see my navigation here. I want to have a button. That's the first thing I want to have. I want to almost have, when I toggle this off, this display, right? What am I hiding here, first of all? Am I hiding my UL? I don't want to hide my navigation bar, right? The size of my navigation. That I don't want, right? So I got to decide what to do. So let's leave it this size, just so we can test this. This is less than 640 pixels, and now I want to use some new styles. I'm not going to put the styles at the bottom. I want to put the styles at the top, right? So I want to start off like this. Again, I want to target my nav UL and my list items and all this kind of stuff like we normally did before, right? So I want to put new styles. And this is my mobile first. So this we're going to say, navigation styles for small screens, right? So screen smaller than 640 pixels, right? And this is my navigation styles in general, and this is my navigation styles for larger screens. Navigation styles for larger screens. We're not specifying every screen in this type of media query, but that's okay. You can get as specific as you want. I can put a media query in here and say anything less than 640 pixels, but I don't have to, because if you use proper code, if you think about it, conditional code says that if I say anything greater, then it's implying that anything lesser is going to be using my default styles, right? So remember, it's a mobile first design, right? So I'm going to start putting nav UL. I need one of those. When I want to hit the UL with a certain size, right? I don't need list items necessarily, right? Although I want to kind of impose my button to be on, right? I want to show my button, a button that's going to pop up, right? And I want to hide my button when my screen size is bigger. I don't have a button, right? And how do I add a button in the first place anyway? So let's go back to my HTML for a second. So I'm gonna kind of, do one of these split screens again. Go to here and click my HTML on this side this time, right? Notice how my list items, my UL, right? All they show is my unordered list. And what I really want is I want one list item, right? But it's got to have a special. I want to have a special class for it. Okay. So we're going to put a list item in here on the top, right? And this list item is going to have a button inside of it. So I'm going to put a new. Just going to put it in there. So if I put a button, it's going to put a button in there, right? I was just to see what that looks like as an example in my design. Notice I have a button that comes up. It knows what a button is, right? And button has got no style to it right now and nothing else. And even if I go greater than 640, my button is going to be there right here at the beginning of my stuff. It's going to appear. Okay. So I'm going to go less than 640. My button should have some kind of, I can make it have an image or some kind of text. Let's just put my text for my button is going to be menu. Right? Click on the menu button. Again, if I go back and refresh, I have a menu button with a little rounded area here. You can make this button look like whatever you want, as an example, right? Again, if I kind of expand this up to here, you see that I have my menu button, right, with a thing of menu. I could put that in there, but this is a great place to put stuff in and style. I can style my button up and everything else, but I'd rather do things with Font Awesome at this point. I want to put a font, an icon font in there instead of text, okay, because I want a font for my button, a menu, if you will, right? Remember how to install Font Awesome. This is part 2. So Font Awesome. How do I do that? When I go down to Font Awesome, find my Font Awesome, download my Font Awesome, put it in the right place, which is for now I'm going to put it on my desktop. Let's put it on my desktop, and I'm going to open it up. My Font Awesome is open on my desktop. Let's take a look and see where it is. I'll minimize all this stuff. Right here it is. So it's a folder of its own, and in order for me to install Font Awesome, people asked me this question last time over email, by the way. I have Font Awesome, but some of the problem is I have to align this in the right way. Notice how CSS is here, where my CSS for Font Awesome is, and my fonts are here outside of my CSS. There's a couple ways to do this. I could drag and drop the CSS and the fonts into my content folder, and that would be fine, right? That's the quickest way to do it. And last time what I did was I kind of changed some of the fonts. I put fonts outside of my content, which I don't want to do, right? So I could also point to it. I could change my Font Awesome CSS by itself, and so it points to the fonts outside. The quick and dirtiest way to do it is to kind of take both of these and drag them inside my content folder. Okay? So I'll do that. And if I look at my content folder, I have to go into Content CSS in order for me to get my Font Awesome CSS. That's the one thing I need to do. So go back. So when I attach it, my Font Awesome stuff, I want to definitely do it before my custom style sheet, my main.css, and after my reset, right? So I want to do something like link, and inside the link, I want to do my content /CSS /font-awesome -min.css. That's where it's going to go. And if you want to know where that is, again, I would go into my content CSS font-awesome.min.css. That's the one I'm accessing. Font-awesome.min-css. That's what it's going to be. Hey. And now that I have that, I can start using my Font Awesome here in my styles, right? So in my page. And I want my, instead of my button being menu, I don't want it to say menu. I want my button to look like a menu button, right? In order for me to do that, I'm going to go up to Font Awesome. I'm going to click on Icons, and I'm going to search for Menu. So if I go to Menu and I press Enter, it's going to give me some stuff. I can use the bar, right? These are the bars that I can search for, right? So this is kind of cool. That's what we normally see. I can make something else happen, like a little carré, right? A caret, if you will, with this that kind of shows me the button, right? I could do that. Bars would be the one we normally see, this little kind of sandwich or hamburger, right? So that's what I want. I'm clicking on it. I notice that I have this, FA bars. That would be the font awesome for this one. So I'm going to copy this and kind of go into here. And instead of putting my button menu in there, I'm not even going to have anything. I'm just going to put a bar in there like this, right? So I've just taken that I, and if it's not big enough, I can always make it bigger, all right? But let's just go in there for a second. If I go back to my page now, I see this. There's my little menu bar thing, right? And if I kind of scroll in, notice that it's right here, right, at the top. That's good. I mean, I want to hide everything, but I want to have this button. We have to style this button a little bigger. Like, notice how, as an example, the text alignment and everything for my button is kind of weird and all this kind of stuff compared to everything else. We got to fix that. So let's just close this off and fix that up with a little bit of CSS. Okay? So I want my button to show up, but I want in order for me to do that, where it only shows up in my with my CSS, when my CSS is small, when my view screen is less than 640 pixels, I need to give it a special class so I can target it, right? So how do I do that? That's inside of a list item, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, I'm going to give it a class of toggle, right? So when I click on anything that has a class of toggle is going to be shown. Anything that has so toggle is display none, right? So I kind of don't display my toggle. Let's see the effect of that in desktop mode. So here's my button. I said display none and refresh, and it's still there, right? Let's just refresh, make sure I kind of saved everything, because that would be bad if I didn't save it. Was that? Should be. So anything that's greater than 640 min width, my display is none. I don't want to see my toggle, right? Which is class of toggle, right? Display none. I don't want to see it, right? It should be inside my media query. When I'm out here, right, my display is block or whatever, or inline block. I want to see it, right? So I want to see it when it's physically when my screen size is smaller. So normally, if I was going to put that in there, let's just do that over here. I can say my toggle outside of my media query, right? I want to have display of, again, it would be the same as inside my list item, right? So it's just a list item option. It's not an anchor tag. I can't click on it right now. It's just an item that's inside of my list item, right? So items that are inside my list item that are buttons, right? That's what it is. So my display is going to be blocked for now. See what happens with that. So again, if I refresh, right, it's here, and if I go back down here, right, it's still there. I want to get rid of it. And let's see how I can target it, if I can even target it at all. Like, it's just a button. The other thing to do is, do I have to use a button? That's the other question. Or can I use a link, right? Like, can I make this, instead of a button, can I make this an anchor tag, right? It's an anchor tag with a class of toggle, right? And if I was to do that, it looks a little different, right? There's my anchor tag, right? It doesn't look like a button anymore, but it becomes almost like the style. I don't want this list item to show, right? So this list item, any list item that has, you know, that's got a toggle, class of toggle, I want it to go, right? I got to be very careful with my CSS to see if I'm targeting it. So how do I do that? I'm going to right-click and go inspect. If I click on this, it's going to show the item, right? What am I actually clicking on? If I click here for my styles, and I want to see what my styles are, it shows me that as I hover over, that the display is none and the display block is gone, right? Like, they're actually messed up. Why is that? Because they're being overwritten, okay? Let me show you that. Because of the way I've written my styles, toggle display none is up here, right? But then in my list items, like in my anchor tags here, I say display block. So that overrides everything. So it's the order that I put my CSS. So what if I took this and put it down here underneath, just before my media query ends? So over here. So my toggle inside my media query, it's going to be display none. And let's see what the effect that has, right? Again, if I kind of take a look at that thing, that's the first thing. It's the order, right? So again, my display none, and I can see that where it's taking effect. It shows me also the main CSS that's being affected by it. So main CSS 58. If I look at that line, where toggle display block, I'm targeting it. It shows me that I'm targeting it, but it showed me also that in my items, when I do when I kind of click on and you know, kind of target this item, right? So if I go inspect, right, I can see that for my the I class itself, right, these are the styles that are taking effect. But for my anchor tag, so I remember, because what I say is all anchor tags inside my list item, right? That's what I'm saying. All anchor tags inside my list item, right? So what's a better way to do this? Anyone has some ideas, right? I want to target this anchor tag that is a class of toggle, right? I can't affect the display, right? My display is locked if I look at the display item, right? Because my anchor tag is the one that I'm targeting. What about my list item itself? My list item, right? My list item itself, if I looked at it, and if I see all the styles that are being overridden, all the ones that are crossed out like that, you can see the ones that they're taken over by other things, right? So my anchor tag with the class of toggle is here. What about my list item? What if I put my toggle on my list item instead of my anchor tag? So I want to not show my list item, it's not my anchor tag that I care about so much, right? Let's go back. So first of all, let's take care of the basic one. So nav, my toggle is the one that it's looking at. But here in my HTML, I put my class on my anchor tag. That's not right. My class should be on my list item, just like it is for my active, right? Let's see what it does now. Now that I'm targeting this list item that's up here, right? Let's see if it has an effect that I want. So refresh, it's gone, right? So no, it doesn't appear. I can't even hover over it. But when I go here, right, it should reappear, right? It should kind of come back, right? So I'm not showing it right now because by default, if you notice, right, it's still gone. I can see the other pieces. There's a space for it up here, right? But I don't see it. I don't have any other styles attached to it either, just FYI, right? There's no styles at all to this thing at all. Even if I hover over it and I surround it, nothing. So I have to look and see what's going on. Yeah. Where? Here?
Yeah.
No. Like where would be? Oh, here you mean? Yeah. No. There's no because you can put classes in there. It doesn't matter. It basically ignores it. But it's the order that I put it in here. So notice that my toggle display block is here. On the bottom, toggle display none is here. Right? So what if I took this piece, right? Like I remember order of operations, right? And all this stuff. Took it from here and put it at the bottom, right? And now let's see what I get. Do I get this, right? My toggle is display block, right? That's what I want. And I refresh. Well, I still don't see it, right? If I target this element, if I go to inspect, right? And I click on this element here, right? Li toggle. This is how you can see what it is. Actually, if you want to see it, it's the Li toggle, right, is here. I've targeted it, but as I move to a smaller screen, right, here it's okay. Oh, that's bad. Look what's happened now. This actually my media query is incorrect now because I've added an extra space in here, right? I got to get rid of that too, or I got to add this property as a list item inside my list item. I can do that too. But so anything less than this now, my 640 doesn't make any sense anymore. It goes from here to there, and then I lose it. Still, my toggle's being going to be hit, right? My display block is being affected, right? What about if I change the color? Because I want to have my my item actually appear, right? So that's kind of an issue. So let's add some color to it. So I'll say my color for my toggle is going to be white. Okay. And let's see if I can do this. I don't have any text in my toggle at all. My toggle text is gone. There is no text. It's just a thing. So there it is, right? It appears. And the reason why it disappeared is because there is no, the anchor tag has no text, and because it has no text, it doesn't appear, right? If this is the case, and this is why it's doing what it's doing, right? I can simply go back now to my HTML, and I can target this instead of going back to an anchor tag. So I don't care about having an anchor tag. I want to make this a button again because I want a button styles. I just want to use some JavaScript in a second. My button. And let's see what the effect that's going to have. Makes it into a button, right? So I can see it. Again, if I go to this size, it's still here. If I go to this size, it disappears. How come? Well, because I'm getting rid of my list item, but when I put a button class inside of a button inside of a list item, it's almost like I have to target my button itself. The button class, or the button styles itself, are not inheriting the stuff that's from my list item, right? List item and anchor tag, they go hand in hand. List item and button, that's a totally different thing. Even though my list item is gone, my button still appears because of the way my styles are affected. And if you can see that, if I was to right-click and inspect that button, right? Inspect the button itself. If I open this up again, notice how my I tag or the button class itself, you can see the styles that are on it, right? And do you see that there's a display none anywhere, right? It's almost like the button got skipped. Here on the list item, it says my display is block, right? By default. There's my display block up here. And now let's see what happens when I kind of shrink it down to this. Less than 640 pixels, right? My display is still blocked for my toggle, right? No matter how small I get. And it looks like when I go into my media query, right? No matter what I do, my display is blocked. Let's go back. Let's shift these around again one more time. Remember, it wasn't the display, it was the order, right? Let's make sure this is the problem. Fresh, gone, right? And then as I go in here, appears, gone, right? And that's just the order of operations there. So my button appears. Now I don't want my button to be there, and I want to get rid of the rest of the stuff, right? So I only want my display to display that stuff. I don't want it to display my unordered list at all, right? So how do I do that? I want my unordered list to display when I click my button, right? Let's go back to that. So a couple things. My list item, right? My list item here is inside the UL, this UL, right? And with anything with a class of toggle, like I said, I want it to disappear, right? What if I made two ULs, both inside my nav? One of them is going to be my button, and that's all it's going to be. And the other one is going to be my menu, right? So let's say if I can do that. So I'm going to say, let's put this up here, and I'm going to move this from up here and create another UL, right, with one list item, right, that's in here, and I'll replace the list item with my button. Here's my button. And let's see what the effect of this will have if I have two ULs, right? One of them with a list, one with a button, only a button, that's all it has is a list item. The other one is a whole menu. Let's see what that does. All right. There's a reason for my madness, you'll see in a second. If I refresh, no difference here, right? If I go over here, boom, I got my UL, and I got another item over here. Cool, all right. Let's get rid of my UL, my menu, right? By default, unless I click my button. So I'm going to say my class of menu, right? This is my nav menu, or my nav bar. We'll call this nav bar itself, right? So my nav bar, I want it to disappear when I'm in my regular mode here. So toggle display block. My nav bar though is going to be display none. So nav bar, nav dash bar, right? Display none. But here, right, my nav bar itself is my UL. My display will be flex, right? Because notice how my nav UL is actually my nav bar, right? I don't want to do nav UL. I just want to say anything that has a style of nav bar, right, will have this style here. So I can actually replace this, my UL, with nav bar, nav dash bar, right? So it's going to have a display of flex, list out type of none, all this kind of stuff. But the rest for this, my display is going to be none. Let's see if that makes any sense. So refresh, no effect. When I go to here, nav bar gone, right? Now this is pretty small, right? This little toggle thing, right? So how do I make it so that the toggle has a bigger space, it's a bigger button, and it's kind of over here, right? So let's leave that at 640 pixels again. So just under 640 pixels right there. And I want to have that space, that little button up here to the right. I don't have to do anything else over here. I've got everything I need. I do have to say that my button is inside my list item, right? So I can target that. I can say any button that's inside my toggle, as an example, is going to have a height, width property, and all that kind of stuff. So how do I do that? So I can target those things. I can say my buttons, this is my regular style, toggle buttons. So any button that's inside my toggle, any button element that's inside my toggle has a display of block, right? With and it's very similar to what I have down here in terms of my size. I want to kind of almost take this size here, right? So just my text align center, all this kind of stuff right here. My color white, but just from here down is what I really want, right? Let's just do that and put it inside my my toggle button. Text align is going to be center for my button. My padding is top is going to be 0.8. My width is 8 m's, and my height is 2.2. Let's see what that does for my button. And refresh. So it's kind of big, right? Bigger for my button, but it doesn't really align it to the right. Remember what I did to align to the right with flex, right? My outer container, my UL, right? My UL, which is my nav bar itself, in this particular case, had a display of flex with a flex wrap of wrap and a justify content of flex end. So I'm going to take all this stuff, right? And I have my toggle. I'm going to put it inside there. So instead of a display block, I'm going to change to display flex. I'm using flex box, right? And then I'm going to save this up to GitHub in a second. Put the color at the end. See if that works. And refresh, right? There's my button. It's not exactly what I want, right? It's not exactly what I want. So, but it's better, right? So now if I click on the button, you see I have clickable effects, and the only button appears when it's less than 640 pixels. Like my button appears. So there's a little menu button, right? Now it's actually giving me a width and a height. I could also do things like I can create a border for the button and everything else. Like for example, for the button, I can create my border radius. I can use a border radius. Let's try that out. Border dash radius for my button. I'm going to make it so it's 5 or 10 pixels. For a second, let's see what that button looks like now. I'm going to see if it's more rounded. There it is. I can make a rounded button. Got a bit of a problem though, that like this, my little eye object there is pretty small, right? I could make it so that my object is bigger, but I want to use it so that I use my FA style. So I'm going to say FA-2 times on the HTML side, right? Refresh. That's bigger, but you see how it's kind of aligned to the bottom, and it's kind of hovering outside of my screen here, right? Well, that's because my navigation itself on the top, if you look at my my masthead, which is my header, and my nav, the nav itself, which is this up here, right? For my button, I never specified a wrap or anything like that. So let's do that. Let's make my nav wrap around my button for a second. Now this is all in my styles, right? So I'm going to say nav, it's going to have an overflow of auto. Right? Let's see what that does now. Oh, that messed me up, right? It kind of made it go over here, right? Why? Because my nav now is not a flex container. What if I made it so it's display flex? An overflow of auto. Still messed up, right? So that's not the solution. But I do want my toggle, which is inside my UL, right? So I want my UL that's inside my toggle, my nav UL, if you will, to have a special height. And that's probably what the issue is. So if I go nav UL, right, display flex, I want that display flex. And I want my height, min height as an example, to be, as an example, of 3 ems. I don't want anything less than 3 ems. Let's see what that does. That's cool, but then I got this. It actually shows my stuff. It doesn't hide it anymore, right? I got all this stuff going on, right? And that's not what I want. This is when I target my nav UL, right, with the display flex property. But my toggle is actually a list item, and my UL itself, right, is the unordered list, the whole unordered list. It's almost like I want to hide my navigation and show my unordered list, not necessarily my list items. So what if I move my toggle? I got to be careful here because my toggle is now my list item, not on my unordered list. If I move this to this, I still got my list item with my button, and here's my unordered list, and I've got my 2 unordered lists, one here and one there. One shows up, the other one is disappearing. Let's see what I got now. That's bad, right? So display flex. So what did I do, right, to mess it up? Because it's something I did, right? Because otherwise it would still be the same way, right? Part of it could be semicolons and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't do really anything different. I did move my toggle around because now I'm targeting my UL, right? So my UL is now flex for this particular case. And down here, when I see my UL being targeted, right? So if I look at my flex bar, my nav bar is my whole UL. Flex wrap wrap. This is all the same stuff that I would have up here. Flex wrap wrap, justify content, flex end, and a color of white. Well, color of white doesn't make any sense for my toggle. It only makes sense for my button. So that's where my color white would be. So let's just get rid of this and kind of put my toggle itself, my button itself. I can put my button in there, color of white. Otherwise it won't work. But why, oh why am I getting this really weird effect now with my other buttons? Like, why is this happening? Refresh. Well, that's good. Right? I like the fact that that came back, but I still don't have that height that I want from my button. What do I do? How do I make this so that my list item now is the right size? Well, toggle, remember, is targeting my UL. Toggle button is an item that's inside my list item, and I really got to target my list item to be this stuff, right? Because that's what I've done over here. If you notice, my nav A has this. That's what my button is. My list item is overflow. I could put that in there. That's the only difference that I had in before, right? So let's put that in there so I can say toggle list item, right? And I can say overflow auto for that, just to wrap my item. Now be careful when I do that. Sometimes I get that weird effect happening as well. Effect, right? And I also can make it, if I want to say my display is where I try this out again. My display is flex, and my height, min height, let's try this out. Min height is 40 pixels. Let's just say 40 pixels now instead of ems, just for a second. That's good. That's what I want. So instead of 40 pixels, I want 8 ems or 3 ems. And I've got that height that I want, right? So same height. Now I got to fix this piece, my button with the item inside, right? So again, text align center is for my button, And text decoration is none. I don't need that for button because buttons don't have a text decoration, right? Display block. Shouldn't that be display block anymore, right? Because that gives me my width and height, my width and my height of my button, right? And my border radius and my color white. Those are all things that it gives me. I also have a padding top. It's something probably that needs to go. So let's get rid of that and see what happens. Padding top goes away. That's good. I mean, that drives my button. But my button doesn't really have a height. My button height of 2.2 m is not really working. It's almost like it's ignoring my button height, right? How come, how come? How about line height? If I try that, because that also gives me some height. So if I say line height, and this time instead of my height, I want that to be 2.2 m. And let's see what that does for me. Nothing, right? Because line height for buttons don't mean anything, right? But what if I put my button height even bigger? Let's say my button height is, I don't know, 4 m. Because I don't have a padding top anymore. So 4 m, refresh, that works, right? That works, right? And that's a little bit too wide. I think my button height is too wide. Let's make my width 4 as well. And I'm gonna reduce that in a second. Let's make it 3 and 3. Nope, I like the other one better. 3.5 and 3.5. Sorry, I'm just adjusting, which is what you would probably do if you were doing your own styles. The border radius of 10 pixels. That's not bad. 3.5, 3.5. I do want a little bit of padding between, or my margin between my button and the top, right? And remember that my button hangs inside my list item. So if I had a little bit of padding, like 0.5 m's, that might be okay. Or 0.25 m might be okay from a margin perspective, not padding. So I say margin, top, as in, 0.25 m's. See what that does for me. Move it down a little bit more, maybe just a touch more. So maybe 0.3 m's. And how about 0.5 m's? 0.5 m's. Okay, so there's my button, but I want it to be on the right-hand side now. My button is a list item. It's inside my list item, right? And my list item is down here, toggle LI, right? With my display of flex, I want my toggle, it says where it says flex wrap and justify content flex end. That's cool. That means this list item, right? If I kind of move this up to here, that's outside my button. And again, it's important to put your stuff in order, right? This should do what I want it to do, right? Move that over to the right-hand side, right? Now, how come it's not working? And we can see, again, if I open this up just to make sure we didn't mess anything else up, we're good. Button, right? But I don't want this button to be here, right? I want this button to be over here, right? So let's take a look. I've got my display flex. This is my toggle LI. This is what's on right now. And some other things are working. Display list item, right? That's crossed out. My font size is crossed out because I've taken away my font size 100. And these are all the item. These are all the list styles that are being affected or affecting my item right now. Let's move this to the side so I can see it a little better. If I want to see my UL, not my list item itself, but my UL toggle, right? Is my whole UL. My list item is the list item that I'm targeting. But I want to target my button. That's what I really want to look at. So let's target my button. So inspect element. And I want to look at my button. And let's see all my styles that are on my button. So display block. If I take that off, nothing. Text align center. There's no effect. So I can take that. I get rid of that. Width I need to have on because that gives me my width of my button, minimum width. My height, that gives me my height. But if I take it away, actually, it makes it too big. So that's good. Border radius makes my button rounded. That's what it does. My color white takes away my black and makes it white on the background. I don't know, maybe I like my black. We'll see that in a second. Other things that happen, flex start, align items flex start is what it is right now, right? Text align is center. That's what's on my button right now. This is all the styles that are affected on my button. Cursor's default, padding, and all that kind of stuff is there. These are all things that are inherited from button when I put button in there, right? Which is a little different. But notice how my button itself, on the button, there is no alignment. Now, if I go to the list item, that's a different thing. My list item has an overflow of auto. If I take that off, that takes that off. If I take the min height value, it kind of crunches that down of 3M, right? My display flex, that messes that up. So I want my display flex on. It's for my list item. And my min height of 3Ms I want on. So this is my overflow. My overflow isn't doing anything. I can get rid of that, right? So these are things I know how to get rid of. I get rid of my overflow, and I can get rid of my text align right now. So let's go back to my styles and do that. So again, I look at my, for my list item, my overflow auto means nothing. Get rid of that. For my button, my text align center means nothing. So I get rid of that. So I want to reduce my styles a little bit more, right? I notice that this is okay. White does that white background and everything else. Now let's take a look at my toggle, which is my UL, right? And see what that does for us. I just want to go back to this and refresh. And I look at my UI toggle. That's what it has, UI with a toggle on it. And notice how I don't see any of my flex properties on here at all. Where's my flex properties for toggle? Do you see it anywhere? I don't see my flex properties. It's almost like they've been ignored, right? So here's my nav. My nav as a display block, right? This is important to see, right? And here's my margin padding and font size and vertical align, baseline, all this kind of stuff that it has on there. But I don't have my my UI, my UL toggle have any styles whatsoever that I want for flex. So how do I target my UL toggle for it to happen? So go back to here. Notice how it has a toggle, and I didn't put the point in there. That's what I'm talking about. That's how stupid it is sometimes if you miss that. Maybe you saw it, and maybe I didn't, right? Now if I refresh, it's got it exactly where I want it. So this is trouble. My list, I want to, when I click the button, I want my, when I unclick, I want this thing to display. And when I click it again, I want it to toggle off. I want it to not display anymore. So I want to kind of show my menu and then not show my menu when the display is happening. For this, there's two ways to do this, but the main way to do it is with a little bit of JavaScript, right? Which leads us into our next discussion. First, let's talk about this a little bit, what we've got going on right here. So up to now, we've got a responsive navigation menu, right? And when I move my nav bar to the left, it disappears and turns into a little button. If I want my button to be a little bit more to the left, I could add some padding or margin to the right of the button. My margin right, as an example, to the button, maybe about 0.5 Ms to move it over, right? Let's fix that first. So again, my button, I want it so that it has margin right. Margin right of 0.5 Ms to see if that is how it would look better. Let's take a look. Maybe even a bit more. That's not bad. But that's, let's leave it like that for now. So again, what that does is it pushes it over for a little bit. So from here, bam, it kind of puts it to there, right? So I can see my button. Right now, it's a kind of a small button. I can make it bigger if I want to. I can add menu in there by adding in some text. That would mess me up though. So we have a responsive menu. Now let's talk about JavaScript for a second. Okay. And in order for me to do this, I need a JavaScript file, right? So let's get rid of this for a second. We're not going to do anything else. And we're going to go into a bit of an intro in JavaScript today, and we're going to finish it off next week, right? So JavaScript is the language of the web, right? JavaScript in the recent days has replaced things like PHP, right? So PHP nowadays is the backend that you'll see almost anywhere. It's good to know PHP from a legacy perspective, right? There's PHP installations everywhere, right? So nowadays, when you're going to learn PHP, you should be learning PHP next, if I'm not wrong. That's one of the next languages you'll be learning, and that's going to happen with Rich, if I'm not wrong, right? So PHP is your backend. There's two pieces. There's the server side and the client side. There's different kinds of technologies. Client-side technologies, HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript, right? Traditionally JavaScript's only been on the front end. But JavaScript can also be used on the back end. So that's why the popularity of JavaScript has really grown. But think about JavaScript as a way of creating interactivity with your website beyond regular CSS. Now I could do some of the stuff that I want to do today with CSS instead of just pure JavaScript. But I want to be able to target. I want to be able to target the buttons. When I click on the button, I want to create a kind of an event to happen, right? That's what's really happening. When I'm clicking on a button, I create something called an event to trigger, right? The button click event, right? That's what I want to do, right? So when the button event triggers, right, I can respond to it by triggering a function, okay? JavaScript in many cases can be written inline, all right, like this. For example, at the bottom of your page, I can start off a new tag script. And what this does is it creates an area that I can start writing some JavaScript. Do this on the bottom of my page. I could write it like this. Now, there's two ways to do it: inline, like we're doing it here, or in a separate file. Let's prepare the file that we're going to put in our scripts folder, and then I'll upload to GitHub so you guys have everything that I have. So in my scripts folder, I don't have anything. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to go New File. I'm going to add in a new file called main.css. Let's rename that main.js. I'll be okay. Here we go, main.js. And I need to link to it. Again, I can't connect to main.js without linking to it first. So I'm going to go into my index.html, and near the bottom, there's different places to hook up to your scripts. You could definitely link a script at the head of your document. And that's how we used to do it in the old days, right? But the problem with that is the script would fire first, right? It would trigger first. And then your rest of your page would trigger. So if I had a problem with my script, right, my page would not render at all. I could block all my content, right, with a script that misfires, right, which is that. So because we don't want to have blocking behavior, right, blocking behavior being the operative word, right, I don't want to have my script being triggered at the beginning of my page before my page is rendered, before my body tag. So typically nowadays, most developers put scripts and links to scripts at the bottom of their page before the end of their body tag, right? This is where I would put it in. And this is how you would write a link to a script. So script. And you want to use, instead of link, you want to use source. And you want to point to the script where it is. And our scripts are in scripts. And my script is called main.js. Not doing anything with the script right now, but I'm going to use both links here to demonstrate both functionalities. So here in my script, I want to say, when I reach this part of my script, so I do all this other stuff here, but at the bottom, once I hit my script, and remember the browser will render a script in the order that it's found, okay? So it'll render any of these tags in the order that they're found from the very top. So if I look at the top, it first renders doc.html, right? HTML language equals English, my header tag, all this stuff here. It finally gets, after my head tag gets into my body tag, it renders all this stuff. And it keeps rendering everything in order until it gets to the bottom where it gets this script section here. And then it renders everything inside here. So before I can react with my menu, before I can even scrunch up my menu, I can render something, an action to happen. And I can do that here or inside my script file. When I make a reference to a script file that's external like this, the browser will leave the execution of the HTML, enter my script file, and execute everything, and then return to the place where I've called it. Just like it does for my links. I haven't talked about this so far, but when I link a style sheet to my page, I read everything in order, and when I hit my style sheet, I leave line 8 alone. I go into my style sheet, perform all the styles into my style sheet, and come back to the web page right back where I left it, on line 9. And I do each individual line in order. That means that when I come down here, before I have a chance to do anything, it's going to do this. So let's put one of the simplest ways. It's almost like a hello world of JavaScript. Let's put in alert. We're going to put it in brackets or in quotation marks, hello world. This is a very disruptive way of doing things, and we don't want to do this ever in our script. It's a really bad example, but I want to show you that it runs, right? So here's my script, hello world. And when I go back to my page and refresh it, I go, boom, I get this page that says hello world. Now, notice that nothing is rendered, friends, right? My navigation isn't rendered. Everything is waiting for my hello world to finish. This is why it's a bad thing. When I click hello world, my OK button, everything renders afterwards. This is a blocking script, right? No matter where I put it. Look, I put it at the bottom and it's going to render right away, right? It renders before the rest of the page kicks in, before my JavaScript. My JavaScript fires before almost anything else. Okay, this is interesting. How about variables in JavaScript? Because, you know, let's say when we learn a new language, we want to learn some things about how we can hold information, right? So how do I do that? Well, I know that in other languages, I can declare a data type, but JavaScript is loosely typed, right? JavaScript, you don't declare the type of your variable. Your variable has actually a type of any, right, by default. It infers, it does type inference, that's what it's called, right, by trying to understand what you're putting into it. Whatever you put into the variable in JavaScript, the variable changes to that type, right? This is bad. This is why developers can hate JavaScript, because they're like, hold on, does that mean that I can put in an integer and on line 1, and on line 2, I can, with the same variable, I can put a string? Absolutely, which is bad, right? Because that means you have no control over what goes in. It's almost like, think about JavaScript as that variable as a container. That's all it is, right? Which would be very bad. So let's do that. So we'll say var my variable, right? And by the way, JavaScript is case sensitive. It's not like VB. VB would be case insensitive. You can make any variable name you want, lowercase, uppercase, mixed case, doesn't matter, and VB wouldn't care, right? Visual Basic, right? But like C# and like other object-oriented languages, JavaScript is case sensitive. So it really, and what I'm using here is something called camel case, with my first word being lowercase and my second word being capitalized, my variable, right? Var is the keyword that we need to indicate that we're creating a variable. We're declaring a variable here, right? Notice when I hover over it, Visual Studio Code tells me it's got a type of any, right? All right, we're going to say my variable equals to 2015, right? Number. And in my hello, in my alert, right, I want to say this. I want to say alert, hello world, and I want to say, give it a little bit of a space. I want to use a plus button, and then another little space. I want to say inside here, I want to say my variable. So I want to kind of add the contents that I get from my variable, which is an integer right now. If I hover over it, now it says a number. Notice how type inference for my variable, even though I didn't know what it was before, once I actually assigned a value to it, my variable now is a number and is not considered in JavaScript right now. At this particular line, line 53, it's a number. Line 54, it could be a string again, right? But this is what it is right now. Now, if I hover over it here on line 56, you can notice that it's my variable is a number, and it's going to concatenate this number with this string, right? This is a string literal. A literal is a number like this, like a number, 2015. That's a literal. That's an integer literal, right? A string literal is anything inside quotations, right? That's a literal, right? When I concatenate a string literal with a number variable, I get a string result. That's what happens. Okay, that's what happens in JavaScript. Actually, that's what happens in a lot of languages. It'll happen in Java, C#, Python, and C++, all kinds of other things, right? Even PHP. When I do concatenation, concatenation happens when I use the plus operator in JavaScript. In C#, as an example, I also can use the plus operator. In other languages, sometimes the operator is a dot operator, okay? Okay, so let's see what happens with my alert. I'm going to save this thing, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to run this page, and now I get hello world 2015. So I get my variable that pops up. Notice how it says prevent this page from creating additional dialogues, because this is a really disruptive way of showing information. So how do we normally do it for C# developers or for JavaScript developers or for Java developers? We want to print to the console, right? And we have a command like that that allows us to do it, right, inside of our code. Instead of doing an alert, let's change this from an alert to console.log. So I want to say console.log, right? Notice that Visual Studio Code gives a little bit of code hinting, right? Console.log, hello world, my variable, right? Okay, cool. I'm going to save that, go back to the web page, and refresh, and now I don't see anything. Where is that console.log? Well, I'm going to right click and press inspect element. And I'm going to click on console here. And notice that there's my hello world, right? It's on my console. Console.hello world, 2015, right? Questions, what I've done so far, right? I know it's pretty straightforward. You're like, okay, Tom, get to the real stuff, right? This is the real stuff, guys. This is what happens with variables, right? And everything else, right? But my variable has been declared, if this is true, right, in my web page, right? And my variable is being declared down here. Here's my variable, right? My variable is 2015. Can I access my variable in my code somewhere? Like, could I actually do something like, get my variable somehow into my code? Like, that's the main thing, right? This main, function. I want to be able to show my variable somehow, right? Well, what about if I put a script inline? Like, could I do that too? Could I put like a script so when I click my button, it does something? Or how about when in my LI, it injects, home plus my variable at the end, right? Can I do that? What if I do that? What if I said like, kind of put my variable in here? It doesn't work like that, JavaScript, at all. You can use JavaScript to do those things, but if I put a script in here, and I can put scripts inline like this too, but this would be bad. Okay, this is the bad thing to do. So if I go script, and if I go in here and I put in script, I could declare stuff in here right here, right? So if I say something like I can declare a variable called my home variable, and I can say that that's equal to 30, right? I don't know, making a number. And I'm reading through everything, and let's see if I run that, if it does anything to me, first of all, if it disrupts anything. So refresh, oh, everything's good. Don't show anything down here yet, because I haven't done a console.log. What if I go back to the bottom, right, all the way to the bottom, and say console.log hello world, instead of my variable, can I find home variable? Can I go home variable? There it is, right? I can see that I can see in my page, I can see my home variable. I can print that out, right? I'll go back up here, and I'll refresh, and now I have said my variables 30. So I can declare my variables inline like that anywhere on my page, and JavaScript doesn't care. It'll actually allow you to declare variables in there. How do I inject stuff with JavaScript? How do I do that? Well, I mean, I could do a console log, right? But in order for us to understand how do we inject content in our page or control content in our page, right? The way to think about it first is what our page is. Our page is a selection of nodes. Think of it this way, right? In our DOM, document object model, right? We have a bunch of nodes. And remember we talked about the node hierarchy, right? The highest node in my page, if I look at my page itself, right? So here's my page itself, is the doc type, right? The doc type is kind of a, almost like a meta tag that happens before my HTML tag. Well, my document starts when I start typing HTML. That's the document itself. The HTML tag represents the document. That's the highest order of node, right? The node at the top of the tree, if you will, right? And in a tree hierarchy, I have something called a head, right? That head is another node that's inside of my HTML, right? My document. And inside of my document, I also have a title, my head. I have a title node that's inside of my head node. That's the document object model. The document object model works within nodes, almost like a hierarchical model of nodes. So therefore, if I want to target something that's inside my body, right, and I want to look inside my header element, that header element is a node that's inside of my body tag, right? And my nav bar, my nav element, is a node that's inside my header element, that's inside of my body element, that's inside of my HTML document, all right? There are containers within containers. Think about a node as a container. So if I want to target something, right, I want to do a special effect, I can do that with JavaScript by targeting that particular node. Now, the best way to target that would be with classes and IDs, okay? So I can use special ways of doing that by saying, well, I want to change the inner HTML value, not the node itself. I don't want to change the list item. I want to change the value that's in the list item, right, as an example, right? So how do I do that? Well, let's go to the bottom, right? So I want to do a new class with this one. I want to execute a command. So before I go to my hello world, I want to do something like this. So I want to assign, I want to make a reference. One of the things I want to do in JavaScript is create a reference to a particular node, right? And in order for me to do that, there's two ways. I can create an ID for the node, right? And that's why we use IDs more than anything else, right? And I could use it by class name. So one way or the other. I have classes already, but I want to target a certain node. For example, I really want to target the node that's in my header, where I have my variable name, right? So I kind of made my variable up here. I want to kind of get rid of this script for a second. I want to target this, but I want my home, the text here. That's the inner HTML, the HTML that sits inside my anchor node here. I want this inner HTML. I want it to be changed, right? Instead of home, I want it to be my home. I want to change the text. I want to do that with JavaScript. I want to target that node. So how do I do that? Well, it's nice to have an ID to kind of link something to this. I have a class of active, right? But I want to kind of change my ID here to something else. I'm going to put an ID inside my anchor tag, which I'm going to use. I'm going to call this this thing home, right? My ID of home. And I want to kind of target this. Well, how do I do that? Well, I got to kind of make a variable to link to it first. So I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say inside my script, I'm going to say var home, right? Remember, my home is a variable, and it can take on anything, right? It's an any variable, right? Is equal to, here's my JavaScript, document dot get element by ID, right? If you notice, this is the two ways you can do this. And in brackets, it tells me the element ID string, which is home, right? So that's the home of my document. So that's the document itself. If I want to show what this is, let's get rid of this for a second, because I don't need this variable either for now. And I want to do a console.log to show me what my home is, right? So this console.log is going to show up in my console, right? Let's see what I get when I use my document model, and I want to get my element by ID, and I'm targeting my home ID, which I've kind of implemented right here. I've just put my ID right here of home that points to my anchor tag that's inside of my list item. See what I get. So I'm going to kind of save this, go back to my thing here and refresh. And I get this. I get a home, href, index.html, home. I get the whole anchor tag. I have a reference now to my anchor tag element that sits inside of my variable name, home. Make sense? I don't want to lose anybody, so anyone have any questions so far? What I'm doing? I'm making a reference. I'm creating a reference, a link. I'm binding, right, my anchor tag, which is the A tag. Notice if I hover over it, it actually tells me what it is, right? If I kind of go over here, I can hover over it, right? All right, let's go back. So that's what I've done here with this one line, right? Var home is equal to this. So that means that home has an inner HTML property, right? So if I say something like this, if I say home dot inner HTML, right? Inner HTML means the HTML, the text value that's inside of my node being the anchor tag. I'm targeting that one piece, right? I want to assign it to a piece of text. I want to say, well, it's going to be something else. I want to make it so it's instead of home, it's my home. Like this. See what that does. See if that actually works. So I want to kind of target that thing and bang, right? So my home, that inner HTML is my home. See what it does. If it even does anything. Let's refresh. My home, right? So it kind of changes it right away. So I can target different elements based by ID, right? That's the first thing I want you to do. So I can change my content. I can inject content. I can change my content. I can add content, whether it doesn't exist, whether it exists or not, right? By my home. So far, everything good? Are we good? There's two steps. One, in order for me to assign content somewhere into the inner HTML, the actual content, not the actual element, right? I'm not injecting elements. I'm not adding anything yet, right? I'm just injecting content. I have to make a binding or a connection somehow to the element that I want to inject stuff into, right? Right now, I've targeted the anchor tag, okay? I can also do it by class names. Here I've done it by ID, right? But what about if I target it by class name? So I want to say something like this. I want to say, well, you know, anything that has a class of navbar, right? I want to target that. So I can say my navbar, you know, this item here, I want to target it, right? So how do I do that? First, I need to create a variable name to hold it. So I'm going to go back down here. And like I have this variable name that's home, which notice the type is HTML element that comes up, right? I can do the same thing for this other thing. So I'm saying bar navbar is equal to document get element by class name. All I'm doing is connecting a binding, and then my class name string, which would be navbar, right? Here's my navbar. My navbar is this UL. Okay, let's see what I get when I output this to the console, which is very important for us to do. So I'm going to go navbar. I'm printing this out now to the console. All right, let's refresh and see what I get. Okay, I got my UL, but not only do I get my UL, but look at this little kind of arrow here. If I click onto it, I also get some other elements in here. I got a UL navbar, and if I click into it, I actually see some other properties here that are kind of inside my UL, right? I've got my first child, right? Here's my first child. I can look at my child nodes, right? And I keep it going down the line. If you notice, there's lots of little properties that are in existence here. Here's a bunch of other list items. Here's my inner HTML. Take a look. My inner HTML actually consists of a bunch of these list items. LI class active, right? That's there. LIA home. And these are all separated by commas, by the way. Comma separated list of inner HTML. Here's my inner text, right? My home, products, services, about us, and contact us is all the text in my inner text, right? I'm not affecting my HTML, I'm affecting my inner text here, right? I can also look at my last child if I want to look at that. So first child, last child, I have all these properties that come up when I target my UL. Okay, lots in terms of you know, of properties. So when I target my class, I target this whole thing. Okay, cool. So I got a couple things that I can target. Questions so far when I'm doing this? Okay, how about this? How do functions look like, or methods in JavaScript? Because we're going to talk about those things as well, right? So here's something I want to do. I want to create a function. Now there's two ways to create functions in JavaScript, okay? And they're both pretty funky, so please take a look, right? Method one, var, my function, this is the funky way. My function is equal to function, some brackets, and some curly braces, right? This is a weird way of looking at it. We don't normally see this. I have to use the var keyword to declare my function, right? And notice that it also returns void. This function does, right? And it calls the keyword function with some parentheses, and the parentheses can receive parameters if I want, right? So an example of this is I want to call this function over and over again, right? Somehow. Like for example, I want to call my console.log, right? I want to put this inside my function. So I'm going to kind of execute my console.log when I call my function. So how do I call my function? First, I got to declare my function like this, and then I got to call my function by actually calling it like this. So I'll say my function, like we normally see in other languages, right? Nothing new or different here, right? So let's see if this fires. Let's see if I actually have my console.log firing at all. So refresh, and I have an a type error. It says uncaught exception. My function is not a function. How come? All right, my function is not a function. It says. Well, hold on, but it's here, and I declared it down here. What if I put the declaration in a different order? So if I take this one and I put it down here and I put it in there. But now is my function a function, right? Because I declared it here and I had it up here. I called it from down here. How come? That should work, right? And let's see if that makes any difference. Refresh, now I get it, right? So order in that particular case made a difference because of the way we called our function, right? Because we declared it down here, up here first, and then we're calling it down here, right? Can't call it before declaration in this particular case, although it is possible other places. Okay, so this is how it's done with the var, with the var keyword. How about if there's another way of writing the same function. I want to show you both notations today, and then I'll leave you for the day, right? With a little bit of that. How do I create the function without using the var keyword? All right, well, I can do it like this. Actually, what this is doing, just to give you an example, and this is kind of funky, so hear me when I'm saying this, because I'm going to test you on it, right? There's two ways to create a function, right? One way is this way, which is I'm using a variable as an alias to point to an anonymous function. That's what this is, an anonymous function that has no name to it, right? This is an unnamed function. I can actually write a function just like this. Look, so no variable name. So function. This is an anonymous function. The problem is I can't do anything with it, right? Just this piece here alone is an anonymous function, right? I need to name it somehow or point a variable as an alias to call this function. So the way I did it before was the variable alias method, where I use the var keyword, var, my variable name, and then I'm pointing to an anonymous function, right? The other way to do it is to actually use the function name, so my function, this way. So function, my function, right? And notice how it says that it's got a problem, right? Because I wouldn't do it like this. I would do it like this, right? That's the other way to do it. And this is how we normally would see it. We would say my function with brackets, and I'm using the keyword function to declare it, right? So those are the two methods. Var, my variable name, my identifier, is equal to, I assign it to an anonymous function. That's one way. And the other way to do it is function keyword, the function name with parentheses, and my curly braces. My internet's disconnected, right? Oh, that means that my session just got disconnected. Let me just refresh that again. Yay. Yeah, that was just a bit of a disconnection. The internet just got disconnected. Right? And then here's my function. Right? So it does the same exact thing as we did before. All right, one more thing. So if that's true, if I can do a function like that, I can call a function that way. How do I create a click? How do I listen for a click, right? Well, there's a way of easily doing it through code, right? So I know that I can do it in two ways, actually. One way I can do it strict with code like this is inline code. And up here, I have my button. There's my button, right, way up here. So my button, when I can click my button, I want to perform a function, right? So let's try this out. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, well, and I'm going to do this inline. When my button is clicked, so on click, I can do an on click event inside my line of my button. When my button is clicked, I want to call a function, my function. Right? I can do that. So on click, call a function, right? In JavaScript here. And here's my function. We've written it down here, right? So I'm not going to call my function this way anymore, right? I'm going to call my function when I click my button. Let's see if I can do that. So refresh. So nothing here. And now there's no button to click, right? The only way I can click my button is if my button's there, which now it is. And when I click my button, I get my console.log. So it responded to my button click event. Make sense? Way one, okay? Let me show you way two. That's kind of a cheesy way of doing it, right? That's kind of, I've linked to my button, right? And my button itself, if you notice, has a toggle. But maybe I want to make this called my menu button. I want to create an ID for it or a class that kind of creates I can create a reference to the button as opposed to using this on-click function. let's do that. So I'm going to kind of get rid of this. And I want to do my button. I want to create an ID, which is going to be my menu button. So here's my ID for the button. It's called menu button, right? And I want to target the menu button the same way I did up here with my home and my nav bar and all that stuff, right? Let's do that. So I'm going to say var button is equal to document dot get element by ID, and it's going to be called the menu dash button. So that's where my button is going to be, right? And then what I want to say, let's get rid of this, right? What I want to say with my button is when I click my button, I want to do something with it. Well, now that I have my button as a button, I can say button dot add event listener, right? And the event listener, I'm going to listen for a type of event. So I'm going to say my click event with a callback function. What's my callback function? Well, it's going to be my function, right? So I'm going to add a listener to my button. So button.add event listener, and then my callback function, okay? Let's see if that works. So refresh, I don't see a button. I go down to here, I see my button now, it appears. If I click the button, then I get this uncaught reference error, navbar is not defined. Where do I have that? Why do I have my navbar not defined? Uncaught reference error, my navbar, my function navbar is not defined because I didn't define it. Let's go back down here. That's right, I'm trying to print out navbar. I killed my variable navbar, so I gotta do something. Well, I wanna print out, you know, button clicked. How about that? Button clicked. Okay, so I know I clicked my button, right? Button really, this is kind of the basis of what we do when we do HTML with JavaScript, right? So refresh. When I click this now, it says button click. So I get a button click event happening with my, when I use the add event listener method to the button. First, I have to link to the button. I have to create a reference to the button element, right? Through an ID, some kind of tag that I use, right? Second, once I have a link to the button, I can add an event listener, and the event listener takes two pieces to it, right? One piece is the type of event, the click event. And the second piece is my callback function. Now, there's two ways to do this. I could call a function, a named function that I have here, or I could do it with an anonymous function inline, like this. So let's get rid of this. And instead of calling my function over here, I could do it like this. Anonymous function, right, inline. And you might see it written this way as well online, right? Where I say, you know, console.log button clicked. Ways of doing it. That's why people love and hate JavaScript. They love and hate JavaScript because it's very flexible. They love it because it's flexible, and they hate it because it's flexible, because there's so many ways to do the same thing. So I've just shown you like 3 ways to do the same button. Watch. So refresh, and click on the button, and button clicked. Right? All right. So that's what I want to show you today for my intro to JavaScript. So we've learned, just to refresh, we've talked about responsive web design with media queries. We've talked about the flexible box model, Flexbox, right? So we can use Flexbox instead of the way we did it before in terms of the way we set up our navigation. We've talked about, we're going to use this same file next week, by the way, guys. I'm not going to create a new one from scratch and all that stuff again. We've talked about how to use some simple JavaScript inline inside of my document. Next week, we're going to link it to an external file, right? So we're going to actually have JavaScript work on an external file itself, right? And we're going to make it so that when we click that button, the menu will appear. And when we click that button again, the menu will disappear. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Okay? So that's it for me for this week. Remember that your marks will be coming in on the weekend. Okay? So this weekend, all marks will be in. Thank you for your patience, by the way. Absolutely, my friend.
For the final project, would making the topic fire be acceptable topic?
The topic of
Fire.
Fire?
Yeah, like fire, like flames.
Are you talking about like, you know, like
The final project.
fire as in?
Like any use of fire, like cook